Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It is my pleasure today to interview Richard Smith, the Keto Pro. Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for accepting my invite.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I discovered you on Anthony Chaffee's YouTube channel, and I was listening to the interview actually just right now before interviewing you. And I was already intrigued just knowing a little bit about, checking out your Instagram, seeing that you're a carnivore bodybuilder and everything that you have done. And as I was listening to the Chafee interview, it was even more interesting knowing your history. So can you share a little bit about that so that my audience gets acquainted with your inspirational transformation and how it eventually led you to a carnivore diet?
Well appreciated. Way too kind. I was once clinically obese and type 2 diabetic. I suffered with daily debilitating migraines that would make me blind, for which I was on 3 different medications for. I suffered with chronic aches and pains, depression, anxiety. And in my mid to late 20s, I could barely walk up the stairs without stopping or being severely out of breath. And I put this down to age, despite only being 20. It's friends around me were putting an awful lot of weight on, and this seemed to be, the norm. Most people were gaining weight and becoming very unhealthy, and I just accepted it as a fact of life. But all of my family suffer with some sort of issue, medical issue, and at the time I was by far the worst, to the point that my family and I used to tongue-in-cheek joke about me not making my 30th birthday. So this is how unwell that I became. I just sort of accepted this. I used to get these daily debilitating migraines, as I say, which would make me blind. These very heavy nosebleeds, which at one stage we thought was linked to maybe a brain tumor or something. I changed my life. I tried every sort of diet and lifestyle that you can think of. I ate off the food pyramid and the eat well plate. I tried to eat my 5 a day. I avoided my saturated fats. I would consume my whole grains. I was watching my salt intake. I was doing everything that we are told to do in order to be fit and healthy. But I became more unwell. A super long story short, I restricted bread. I took bread out of my diet. Now, I used to love consuming bread. I would have bread with every meal. I'd have bread for breakfast in the form of toast. I'd eat sandwiches for snacks. I'd sometimes just snack on bread. I would eat chips for dinner and lunch, in a sandwich, a chip sandwich. Now, it was brown bread, which we are led to believe is healthy, which it isn't, by the way. Spoiler alert.
Not at all.
So I continued down this path of becoming very unwell. But I restricted bread, and I soon realized that I dropped a considerable amount of weight incredibly quickly, and I felt better for it. So in that instant, I sort of fell into the low-carb scene, if you like, and began to re-educate and learned a little bit more about low-carb and the ketogenic lifestyle, which going back 10 to 11 years ago was, incredibly rare, especially in the UK. I mean, it's still not very well known in the UK. It is growing. I am trying, this end to push the carnivore ketogenic lifestyle, but it's a slow burn. But there was very little information around at the time, very little information. And what was available was a lot of misinformation. There was so much misinformation in regards to low carb and keto lifestyles. But I persevered. I fell into every pitfall that you can imagine. But I learned from the mistakes. I learned the hard way. Off the back of that, my health improved dramatically. I lost 107 pounds. I reversed my diabetes. These migraines, which were absolutely debilitating, had cleared up. Now, I still suffer with migraines occasionally. I'm no longer on medication. And instead of suffering with these every day, I will suffer with 1 to 2 attacks in a year. Whoa. And this is usually to do with lack of sleep or stress. Now, I work for myself. I'm self-employed. So lack of sleep and stress when you're self-employed,
Tell me about
they go hand in hand.
Yes.
But my health improved to no end, to which point I decided to show the world how life-changing, this diet was, this lifestyle was. So I began to train again properly. I entered a men's physique bodybuilding competition as an amateur. Very long story short, a few years later, I was awarded pro status. Shortly after that, I became British champion, and 2 years later, European champion. So I
Wow.
went from being unable to walk up the stairs, suffering with these daily debilitating migraines, this debilitating anxiety, which would prevent me from leaving my house. I quite often use the analogy that my life was spent living in boxes. So I was living in my box in a house. I would leave my house and step into my metal box, to which I would drive to another big box. And then I would enter this big box and go into a small box, my office, in the place of my work at the time. And I'd spend all day there and then perform this in reverse. So my life was spent living in boxes. Now, this is no way to live your life. That's no life worth living. But this is how debilitating the anxiety and depression is. And I think most have suffered with this, but for those that haven't, it's difficult to comprehend, but it is absolutely debilitating. But now I have my life back. From changing the food that I consumed, my life has changed. To a degree that is, you can't comprehend. I give public speaking events to hundreds of people. We do talks and podcasts in front of thousands of people. I get up on stage and compete in front of thousands of people. Now, I would have never have done this prior to changing my lifestyle. And it's all to do with changing the food that you consume, because the food you consume changes everything within the body, including what goes on for the neurotransmitter signaling within the brain, which we can go into more detail if you like. But yeah, I've retired from competing professionally. The reason for this is bodybuilding is a lonely sport. It involved competing at unsociable hours. Now, I still train. I still hit the gym. But instead of doing silly amounts of hours every day, every week, I tend to train 2 to 3 times a week just to keep a little bit. I am considerably smaller now than I was this time last year, but I've gravitated now into competing in running and cycling. So duathlons with the goal of competing in Ironman eventually. Now, this is a complete 180 from bodybuilding and absolutely counterintuitive to being a bodybuilder. So I have to change my physique. I have to drop an awful lot of weight. And, the energy systems and everything that you were using is completely different. So I've barely done any running in my life, or cycling for that matter. It's something that I'm new to, but it's something that I feel I'm progressing incredibly quickly with. But again, it's more of a social sport. So I now run and cycle with a local running and cycling club. So it's a social thing as well. It's competitive. I've competed in 1 duathlon and 2 10K runs to date, with another 10K run this weekend, and another duathlon planned next month. But yeah, that's my story today.
Wow, I have so many questions. Okay, let's start. First of all, what's a duathlon?
So a duathlon is basically 2 events. So for me, it would be a run, bike, and run. So the first duathlon that I competed in was a 5K run, a 30K bike, and another 5K run. So it's called a sprint duathlon. It's a short duathlon, but highly competitive. There were I think around about 1,500 competitors, give or take. Don't quote me on that. I may be wrong, but I came 66th, which I was quite pleased with, considering these are athletes that have been training for years and years and years. And I'm by no means a good runner. There are runners and cyclists out there who would run rings around me. But what is impressive is the little amount of time that's taken me to get to where I am. And this is down to diet and lifestyle. And the benefits to living a healthy lifestyle, restricting those grains and seed oils, and improving insulin sensitivity, and being fueled by the ketone body beta hydroxybutyrate literally takes your body to an entirely different level.
So Do you still train with weights at least like a minimum to maintain that muscle mass? And I think that would help you too, right? With,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm a big believer in weight training. I think everybody should be lifting weights. That said, it's not essential. I do think that for those who are incredibly healthy, nutrition is the most important. I believe nutrition to be probably over 90% of health and well-being. Now, you can live a long and prosperous life through living a carnivore or ketogenic lifestyle. Now, that said, if you were to implement certain training, i.e. weightlifting or a little bit of cardio, I believe that this is going to only further enhance, your health and well-being. So I do keep a hand in with the weight training. I try to do 2 to 3 sessions a week, which is considerably less than I used to do. I've changed the style of training because now it isn't so much about being big and aesthetically pleasing. It's quite the opposite. My goal is to be smaller, although I don't want to lose my entire physique. So a friend of mine recently compared, because I'm worried obviously about losing the physique that I've worked so many years to gain. And I am considerably smaller. I'm around, but somewhere between 2 to 3 stone lighter now than I would have been at this time last year. Yet my dry protein is only 2 kilograms lighter. So despite somewhere between 2 to 3 stone lighter, I'm 2 kilograms. So what's that? That's just under 5 pound, which you could argue has been lost through lack of creatine supplementation. So I used to supplement with creatine. I'm going to start back up with that. But again, I dropped that in order to lose a little bit of weight, in order to be lighter on my feet during a race. Now, the interesting thing there is that despite the 2 to 3 stone loss in weight, to only be down 2 kilograms or 4 to 5 dry protein is absolutely phenomenal. Now, this means that most of the weight in the muscle is volume, as in water, glycogen, and salts. So I do believe that if I were to gravitate back into that style of training again, that I would be back to a similar size and physique incredibly quickly. And I know this following an operation that I had 2 years ago. I had an abscess in my arm. The wound had to remain open. I was told it would take a 12-week healing period, and I healed in little over 3 weeks. So 9 weeks quicker than the doctors and nurses had ever seen anything else heal before. And I put this down to my diet and lifestyle: lots of protein, lots of fat, and lack of anti-nutrients, which I believe is essential. Now, I was out of action for 8 weeks. I went considerably smaller. Obviously, I couldn't do any training whatsoever, but I managed to get back to the same level of strength within 2 weeks of training again. Now, if I had lost muscle within that time, I would have lost strength. You can't build muscle that quickly. It's impossible to build muscle that quickly. So the fact that I was back to the same level of strength in such a short space of time means that muscle was still there. All I was lacking was that volume in the muscle. And I put this down to training. If you train and lift weights, you send volume into the muscle. So I'm confident that I could get that back incredibly quickly. But yeah, as I say, now it's, my goals are slightly different in regards to the way that I compete. I need to be considerably lighter and less powerful up top. But it does take its toll because, I've never been happy with it. I don't think any of us are ever happy with the way that we look. We always want to look a little bit better, don't we? But when I look at competition pictures, I'm now or videos of me training for a comp prep, previously, I look at them now and think, that looked pretty good, It's something I was
saw
quite
the
happy with.
pictures. Absolutely.
And now I don't look like that. I'm still lean. I'm still really vascular. I've still got, a nice chest, and I've still got abs. But a friend recently said that you've gone from being He-Man into Action Man. So, I'll take that for now. But I did like, the larger look, but it, again, it was purely aesthetics. And I don't think for me, it was healthy to continue down that path and continue to grow. I was suffering with lower back pain. my frame is incredibly small, and I think the top half of my body was putting so much pressure on my lower back. I used to suffer with back pain to the point that when I began running, I could not run further than 1.5 kilometers. Now, I've always been, since being ketogenic carnivore, I've been fit and healthy, and I'd regard myself as being fit and healthy. To not be able to run 1.5K is pretty poor. And, that knocked me for 6. So I did improve incredibly quickly. I made some changes. I dropped a little bit of the weight. The back pain cleared up incredibly quickly. And within, I think it was a few weeks, I managed to run a 5K. It took me 42 minutes to run my first 5 kilometer. I now, a few weeks after that, I ran the 5K in 1933. And now I run a sub 19 5K in a few months of running. Now, I'm not fit. I'm not genetically fit. And by that, I mean, I'm not genetically predispositioned to be a runner. Now, I don't know if you use Garmin, but I use Garmin to track my heart rate. So the watch that I wear, it tracks my heart rate variability. It measures a lot of parameters, and it gives you, based on these parameters, it will give you what it believes that you are capable of running 5K, a 10K, and half a marathon. And based on these parameters, it tells me that I am only capable of running a 5K in 23 minutes. Yet, I have physically ran 4 minutes quicker than that. But because it's taken my measurements based on a standard person, because my VO2 max isn't brilliant, this is the figure that it's given me. But I believe that my diet, because I am utilizing beta hydroxybutyrate as an energy source, that I am able to upregulate these systems and basically outperform what the data is suggesting. Now, if I were to upregulate my VO2 max, basically become fitter over time, which is inevitable should I stick to running and cycling, it's interesting to see, where this will take me, But that said, I don't want to gravitate into it so deeply that I'm going to become a stick. I don't want to be, one of those.
Yeah.
Nothing against the hardcore runners. I don't want to be. I still want to maintain, a physique that I'm happy with. So that's what I'm torn at the moment, in this desperation of trying to maintain some form of physique while trying to be
that is
lighter
the
on my
struggle right now.
That is the struggle.
So according to the Garmin, it's an app, right? And a wearable device,
That's
right?
it. Yeah.
So according to it, you're supposed to be able to do like, so a 5K is like 3 miles, right? And so if it's like in 20 minutes, so that's approximately a speed of 7 miles per hour. You're doing 7 miles per hour for those 20 minutes, right? And that's how you get to those 3 miles in 20 minutes. But you did it much faster, which is insane. And I am a runner. So 7 miles, that's me sprinting. I don't think I can do that for more than 0.3 miles at a time. And then I have to walk a little bit.
So I did my second 10K race 2 weeks ago. I've got another one now this weekend. But the second time that I've ran 10K prior to this in training, but incredibly slowly. So this is working on what's called zone 2 training. So this is your base. Incredibly slow running. But on race day, it's a race, you go in as quickly as you can. So on my second 10K, on an incredibly hilly course, a course that was recording an elevation of just under 300 foot. So a pretty hilly course, I recorded a 40:52, which would lead me to believe on a flat course, I'm capable of 38 or 39. Now, that was giving me, I believe, an average of just over 6-minute miles. So on a 5K, I should be capable of sub 6-minute miling. Which I haven't raced a 5K for, a few weeks. In fact, I've done a few 5K runs. I haven't raced a 5K for a couple of months now, probably. So that's going to be an interesting one to give that a try and see, what we are capable of on an all-out 5K.
Amazing. Yeah, it's just, we so vastly underestimate our limitations, right? Our capabilities. And so like we put those limitations on ourselves. And I'm assuming you're a fan of David Goggins. I feel like every runner and every person who's living our lifestyle is a big fan, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for
Let
sure.
me let me ask you about carbohydrates. Have you had the urge or temptation, especially after training so hard and you get those afternoons right after like an intense training session where you've literally wiped out all of your neurotransmitters, you just pumped them all out in that training session and you feel almost dead. Don't you double guess, like, is carnivore really the best refeed recovery method? Maybe I should just get maybe like some fruits, some sweet potatoes. I think it's easy to steer clear from the grains, but there at some point, wouldn't that temptation be strong? And how do you deal with that? Or what is your strategy?
So now when we look at carnivore and keto, and then we look at a standard diet, people think that it's either one or the other. But there are shades of gray. It doesn't have to be one or the other. The beauty of living a ketogenic lifestyle for so long is you become metabolically flexible, which means my body can utilize carbohydrate for fuel while maintaining a ketogenic state, or it can utilize fats for fuel. So it takes a long time to become metabolically flexible, but I've been living this lifestyle for in excess of 10 years. So I can use carbohydrate, and I have used carbohydrate. I've experimented because my goal is I'm in pursuit of optimal health. I want to be the fittest and healthiest that I can. I want to live the longest that I can. And I truly believe that the human body is capable of living to 120, should we be consuming the correct food. And I genuinely believe that. So I've gone from being possibly looking at maybe not making my 30th birthday to basically wanting to sail past that 100.
Crazy.
But along the way, I've experimented extensively. So coming back to a point that I made earlier, there were very little information around, especially in the UK when I began my journey. Much of the information was stateside. Now, that said, a lot of that I believe to be misinformation. I think that there are a lot of influencers and researchers out there that seem to have pieces of the puzzle correct, but most of them seem to be missing one or two pieces, or I think they seem to be 80% of the way there with 20% incorrect. Now, a common example, it was once believed that excess protein would pull you from a ketogenic state through the process of gluconeogenesis. Now, we know this is untrue, yet if you go on to the forums on Facebook, on social media, this is still a rampant theory that excess protein will pull you from a ketogenic state. Excess protein will not pull you from a ketogenic state. The insulin to glucagon ratio remains unchanged when you're in a ketogenic state. So do not fear protein. Protein is the most important macronutrient. So that's an example of the sort of misinformation. But early on in my journey, I believed that things like spinach and kale and turmeric were incredibly good for me. Now, I don't know what your thoughts are on these things, but I'm
a carnivore, full blown.
Good,
Yeah.
right, there we are. So
Yeah.
we're singing off the same hymn sheet. So I used to make these smoothies. I was living keto, but I believed that I needed lots of spinach and kale and broccoli. And now I used to make a smoothie every day. So I would add spinach to my smoothie. I would add turmeric and some black pepper. And I was fit and healthy. I was the healthiest that I'd ever been until now. I began removing plants from my diet through laziness, because it takes me 2 minutes to fry a steak. I could not be bothered to cook kale and broccoli. So I took them out purely through laziness. Now, 6 months into this, it occurred to me that I hadn't eaten any fruit or veg for a long time. Now, I was always led to believe that fruit and veg were essential for life. I thought we need our 5 a day. This is where our nutrients come from. but I felt better than I had ever felt before, even more so than when I was ketogenic. So something didn't quite compute to me. So I began researching. I began looking into nutrients within vegetables. And to my surprise, vegetables are an incredibly poor source of nutrients. Now, as I was growing up, my mother used to tell me to eat my carrots so I could see in the dark for retinol, for vitamin A. Carrots do not contain any retinol.
Nope.
No plant contains vitamin A.
Yep.
Now, plants contain something called beta-carotene, which is a precursor that needs to be acted upon by an enzyme called BCMO to convert it into the active form of retinol. And to do so, it's depleted by 21 times. So plants do not contain any vitamin A.
Yes.
Plants are incredibly poor sources of B vitamins, to the point that they do not contain any cobalamin, vitamin B12.
Right.
They do not contain vitamin D. Kale, which I used to consume for vitamin K. Now, in the UK, a pack of kale is stamped with a stamp that says high in vitamin K. Kale contains 0 vitamin K. Kale contains vitamin K1, and the human body needs vitamin K2.
Yeah.
Nuts and seeds for our omega-3s is a fallacy, because nuts and seeds contain ALA. The human body needs EPA and DHA, episopentanoic and docosahexaenoic. Other foods, other nutrients such as choline, carnitine, creatine, carnosine, taurine, none of these things we can get from plants. So plants are not a very good source of nutrients. Popeye used to tell us to consume spinach for our iron. Spinach, despite containing iron, it does not contain any bioavailable iron. It contains non-heme iron. The human body needs heme iron.
Mm-hmm.
And it also contains anti-nutrients which block the absorption of that iron. So, we cannot get iron from spinach. So the plants are not a very good source of nutrients. Now, when you look at animal proteins are packed with every vitamin and mineral that we need, not just to survive, but thrive. So I gravitated into being more animal-based.
Okay.
Now, further research led me down to understand the detrimental effects of phytoalexins, plant toxins, lectins in certain foods, phytic acid, tannins, oxalates from spinach. Now, coming back to my little spinach smoothie, I used to add spinach. I used to add a full pack of spinach to my smoothie, and I would add turmeric and black pepper. Spinach is incredibly high in oxalates. In fact, in the UK, spinach comes in 200-gram pouches. That 200-gram pouch contains around about 1,500 milligrams of oxalates. 5,000 milligrams has been known to kill people. And what was I doing? I was adding my turmeric, which is also incredibly high in oxalates, and then I was adding black pepper. Now, black pepper blocks an enzyme in the body called UDP glucuronosyl transferase, which is part of phase 2 detoxification in the liver. And this is how the body detoxifies these anti-nutrients. And black pepper is added to supplements in order to increase bioavailability, but it's not increasing bioavailability per se. It's preventing the body from detoxing a toxin. The body doesn't want these in the body. This is why it's trying to remove them. And we are adding this black pepper, which is blocking the body's ability to do this. So I gravitated into a carnivore or animal-based lifestyle, even more so, and began to thrive at a level that I didn't feel possible. Now, when I tell people, I work with clients, I'm a nutritionist. When people come to see me and they ask me what to consume to be super fit and healthy, now, if I were to tell them, just go home and eat a piece of steak, they would look at me stupid. They would walk across the road to the bakery, which is across the road from me, from our shop, and they would probably throw in the towel and just stuff their face with pies and pasties. So what I find is an incremental approach seems to work best for most people. And by that, I mean gravitating people slowly, explaining about the most detrimental foods. So to me, the most detrimental foods are our grains, foods high in lectins. Grains are detrimental to our health. grains don't only cause weight gain, the lectins in the grain don't only cause weight gain. And they do this because they bind to insulin receptors and they signal the body to store 5 times more fat than insulin does itself. But they also bind to the epithelial cells, so the enterocytes lining the gut, and they cause the release of a molecule called zonulin. Zonulin release causes a gap in the tight junction, which basically pokes holes in the lining of our gut and leads to intestinal permeability. And then through a process called molecular mimicry, the body creates antibodies to fight, or creates antibodies to fight these toxins that are in the blood. And then through molecular mimicry, the body starts attacking other proteins in the body that look the same. Now, this is autoimmune disease.
Right.
So grains,
it all starts in the gut, right? You start having that break in the integrity of your gut lining, and now maldigested particles of food that are larger than what your immune system is used to seeing in your blood starts to cross. Even bacteria, even probiotics or good bacteria, they're not supposed to be in your gut, in your blood, right? So now your immune system starts to go haywire because it's confused. It's trying to destroy these things that it thinks is an invader. Instead, it starts inadvertently also destroying your thyroid gland or your joints or whatever, antibodies it's creating. And there you have it, autoimmune diseases. That's why you see a lot of people who are living a healthy lifestyle, doing all the yoga, all the salads, the plant-based diets, and then at 50, they're hit with a multiple sclerosis diagnosis. It's like, where did this come from? It's from all the plants you've been eating.
Yeah, exactly. And these are foods that we are told to consume every day to be fit and healthy.
Yeah.
They are detrimental to our health. And arguably number 1 on the list are seed oils.
Yeah.
Vegetable oils. Now, these are high in an oxidized omega-6 called linoleic acid, as well as being incredibly high in phytosterols. Now, phytosterols will lower our body's natural cholesterol, which we don't want. Cholesterol is essential for life. Every cell in the body is made of cholesterol. It's essential for cell formation, cell communication, nutrient absorption, nutrient transportation. It's essential for healing, production of hormones. We can't live without cholesterol. Now, on a percentage, seed oils will cause roughly 6% more insulin resistance than excess carbohydrate. So if you were to remove one thing, I would, on an insulin basis, I would probably argue that removing seed oils are probably going to see a bigger benefit. But if you were to remove the two, if you were to remove all grains and seed oils, you are going to be exponentially fitter and healthier. And to me, this is the beginning of somebody's journey, because when you mention the word carnivore or keto, it scares an awful lot of people. But to tell people all they need to do is stop eating bread, pasta, rice, consuming these grains, be mindful of these seed oils, which were invented as machine lubricant, for which you can run your diesel car on. They have no means, or they have no place in the food system. They should not be there. Yet they're in almost everything that we consume. Now, making these 2 changes, you are going to be considerably healthier. And after this, I educate the importance of electrolytes. So we're told that salts are incredibly bad for us. We should avoid. So sodium is essential for life. And then beyond that comes carbohydrate. Now, all the way along this journey, I highlight the fact that this isn't a diet. I'm not restricting. We don't want a calorie count. This is the means of eating highly nutrient-dense foods, consuming foods until you're full, and only eating if you're hungry. If you're not hungry, don't eat. I eat an awful lot. I love to eat.
What is your diet like right now?
So it's mostly red meat. I eat steak and eggs every day.
Right.
Now, eggs don't work for all people. Some people can be allergic to the protein in eggs, as well as there are a lot of carnivores that consume A2 dairy and coffee and nuts and seeds. Now, many of these can be allergic to those as well. So there's certain foods within the carnivore lifestyle that can still cause considerable issues.
So would you say that for like 90%, if not all of your diet is basically just steak and eggs?
Yeah, for sure. Red meat is the basis of most of my meal. Now, I do consume cheese. So now dairy is a gray area within the carnivore sort of community, but What I find with cheese is that it's made in such a way that it's treated with an enzyme called rennet, and it has a lot of the lactose and the casein removed. So it doesn't cause an issue for me.
Mm.
I find real cheese, now some cheeses, which I call fake cheese,
Yeah.
do cause issues, but real cheese I find works really well for me. Milk, regardless of whether it's A2 or not, always causes issues.
Yeah.
And I seem to be hypersensitive to most things other than red meat. I'm not against chicken or pork, although I do find that some people do have intolerances to those, and I believe it's to be down to the foods that those animals are fed, i.e. they're heavily grain fed, and pork in particular contains a high omega-6 level naturally, roughly 10 times higher. Now, there is a caveat to this because we look at linoleic acid as being detrimental, but it only becomes detrimental when it's oxidized. Now, the definition of oxidation is when that meat becomes rancid. So there is a gray area when it comes to pork, because if it's fresh, then
No
technically
problem.
it should be okay. But again, I would advise to consume those in moderation. I'm not against it, and I do consume pork, but steak is, I eat steak every day, and sometimes some days that's all I'll eat.
That's amazing. And so you don't have any cravings or temptations to load when you need, like, when do you feel like you have first of all, when do you feel like you need a recovery? And if you feel like you do need a recovery, how do you recover? Do you ever get tempted to do carbs? Have you tried doing carbs?
Sorry, yeah, I've gone off on a complete tangent because that was your original question, and I've gone off on, sorry.
It's okay.
Um,
I have it here circled. I wasn't gonna let you go without giving me
Good.
all the goods here. Yeah.
Apologies. Yeah. So coming back to your original question, in my early days, as I say, I experimented with carbohydrate because I don't want to be closed-minded. I'm in pursuit of this optimal health, and if that involves a little bit of carbohydrate, then that's fine. I'm all for that. I know athletes, so I work with athletes, amateur and pro. Some of these notice a benefit to a little carbohydrate, but the majority do not. They're all in pursuit of being dual fueled. But what I find is when they do experiment, they tend to come back to being purely animal based, myself included. So I've experimented, and I will continue to experiment. I haven't written it off completely, although I haven't consumed carbohydrate for a long time. But then I haven't done running or cycling before. So, I mean, this could be a new means to test that. But to put it into perspective, I did an 80-mile bike ride recently, and I've never ridden 80 miles before. The longest that I'd ridden, I've only been riding a few months, the longest I had ridden prior to that was 45. So this was nearly twice that distance. Now, the guys that I was going with were all carbohydrate athletes. These are Ironmen, people who have completed Ironman and seasoned triathletes. They had 2 or 3 bottles of water, and they had an endless supply of carbohydrate in the form of energy gels and sweets and chocolate bars.
Sugar.
Now, halfway, they all stopped and carved up, and they were asking me, what are you consuming? And it's like, well, nothing. Oh, did you eat before you come out? And no, I haven't eaten anything. I'm fasted. And it's like, well, you've ridden all this way so far and you haven't eaten anything. No, nothing at all. Oh, you're going to struggle on the way back. You're going to really struggle. And all of the way back, they were dipping into their back pocket, energy gels, carbohydrates. Now, I did this entire ride on 1 bottle of water with electrolytes and C8 powder, and that was it. And they
C8 powder, can you share?
Yes, so C8 powder, caprylic acid.
Oh,
So it's a coconut oil.
right. Shouldn't.
So I'm even though I'm carnivore, and technically C8 oil comes from a plant, it is one of the most ketogenic substances on the planet. It works incredibly well, superior energy for the brain, the body, and the heart.
Right.
And
Because it turns into ketones automatically. It's a medium chain fatty acid, right? And so the body doesn't store it like right away. It turns it into ketones. So it's a direct source of energy that you can use right there when you need it.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Gotcha.
So
okay, so that's all you had on an 18-mile. Wow.
80 mile bike ride.
80.
80, yeah, 80. Now, all the way back, these other riders were asking me how I was, because obviously they were carbing up and I was still pushing on, and I was fine. Now, we got to the end of the ride, and they were spent, and I was spent too. I'm not going to lie, you know, it did hurt. It was difficult. I'd never ridden that far before. But when I checked Strava with my Garmin after, I had the highest average speed from all of the riders. And these are guys that have been training on cycling for years and years and years. I did that completely fasted with just electrolytes, water, and MCT powder, and that was it. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a better athlete by any means, because these guys are incredible. But on that occasion, my body managed to utilize my own body fat, as well as, you know, which I've always got with me, the electrolytes and MCT. And I did not crash. I did not bonk. So coming back to your question, did I feel the need for carbohydrate? No, I didn't. I was spent after the 80 mile, but all I wanted to do was get home and cook a fatty, juicy steak.
Nice.
So no, the beauty with being adapted is the body upregulates certain systems, enzymes, and pathways. So my body upregulates something called the monocarboxylate transporters, also known as MCTs, but not to be confused with medium chain triglycerides. Now, this upregulates the body's ability to utilize fat for fuel, or ketones in particular. Now, something else that the body does when you become adapted is it upregulates the lactic acid system. So where people will be training or competing and they will feel the burn in their legs and their arms, that's lactate buildup. That's the body being inefficient. The hydrogen ions are unable to buffer the lactate. Now, a fully adapted ketogenic athlete will send this lactate to the liver. The liver will convert it into glycogen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's right, you did hear me correctly, into glycogen, and ship it back to the muscle, arguably at a higher rate than a carb athlete. So a ketogenic athlete who does not consume any carbohydrate still carries glycogen, basically carbohydrate in the form of glycogen in their muscles at the same level, if not higher. We do this without having to consume any carbohydrate. And the beauty is that we can operate from both systems. So we can use fat for fuel in the form of ketones, or we can use this glycogen. A carbohydrate athlete cannot do this. A carbohydrate athlete can only be fueled by glucose. A ketogenic carnivore athlete is dual fueled. And this is why I believe that it's not just superior for health and well-being, but for athletic performance, because you can be fit, but it does not mean that you are healthy. So you may be fit in spite of being unhealthy, in spite of and not because of. But if you are healthy as well, you are going to be considerably fitter. And these are the things that we teach. These are the things that I teach on a daily basis. But
the electrolytes that you use, is there a specific one? Do you particularly pay attention to artificial sweeteners and flavors, or does it not really matter?
Yeah, so this is a jar that's on my desk. Now, I use this as a little pen holder. Now, this is my brand. So I created a range of products for me to use on my lifestyle. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail on this because this isn't a sales pitch. This isn't why I've come on today. But I created a range of products.
There's nothing wrong with a sales pitch. You're doing good work.
There's very little product to help support the low-carb, ketogenic, and carnivore community, especially in the UK. And the ones that are full of utter rubbish. So I've created an electrolyte formula, which contains the best ratio and most bioavailable forms of sodium, magnesium, and potassium. But I've also added molybdenum, selenium, and astaxanthin. Now, these are things that will help with thyroid function and blood pressure, athletic performance, hormone production, things that other people will not put in because, one, they don't understand the benefits, and two, they can't, they wouldn't spend the money on putting them in there. But I don't create a product to make loads of money. These products are made for me to use, and that's what's in my drink. And I use them and I sell them to help others along their journey. But molybdenum is 550 times more potent than vitamin E as an antioxidant. It's 80 times stronger than vitamin C, something like 800 times stronger than CoQ10. It's absolutely incredible stuff. Astaxanthin is the only carotenoid that is a true antioxidant. So when we look at things like turmeric, which we are told are antioxidants, they are not antioxidants. They are pro-oxidants. They activate something called the NRF2 pathway, which is an oxidative stress pathway. The idea behind
The
this,
vegans are gonna come for you when you
it,
say that. You
they
know,
do.
it's like hormetic stress.
Now to put this into perspective, I make apple cider vinegar. It's a product that I stock. I added turmeric to this because I believed the turmeric was good for you. Now, when I discovered that turmeric was detrimental to your health, I did a post online and an email blast to tell people this product contains turmeric, but I believe that it is not good for you. So if you suffer with arthritic pains, oxalate buildup or kidney issues, do not use this product. Now, this is a product. Now, this cost me tens of thousands of pounds worth in sales because I basically told people not to buy my product. But
wow.
I put out the information that I find as I find it. Now, this product, I will not create again because of this. So I don't do this in order to make money. The business is an incredibly difficult market. We make an incredibly, in fact, the business over the last 5 years has lost money. I'm in this for education purposes and for health and well-being, and for me to be the healthiest and fittest that I can, and to spread the word on the ketogenic and carnivore lifestyle. Turmeric is not your friend. It activates the NRF2 pathway, which is an oxidative stress pathway. And as you say, as you rightly said, the theory of hormesis being good for us. Now, hormesis is good for us if it comes from environmental standpoint. So that by that, I mean cold water therapy or heat treatment. But cellular hormesis in the form of turmeric is not good for us because it activates the NRF2 pathway. It elevates glutathione. Now, glutathione is elevated in an attempt to conjugate that to the toxin to excrete it via glucuronic acid through the body. So it's trying to take this toxin out of the body, but glutathione is elevated, and this is what scientists are seeing. Scientists are seeing the elevation in glutathione. Oh, this must be very good for us because it's increasing the body's master antioxidant. But glutathione quickly drops back to baseline and then falls below quite often. Now, that isn't a true effect of hormesis. Hormesis in the form of cold water therapy will elevate glutathione for hours and hours, if not days, and it will quite often drop to a level above baseline. Now, other things that activate this NRF2 pathway are things like mercury, arsenic, lead, tobacco smoke. So if you are to believe that turmeric is good for you, then you must resign to the fact that
one cigarette a day.
Exactly. and we know that not to be true. So astaxanthin is a true antioxidant because it does not begin its journey as a pro-oxidant. And astaxanthin comes from an animal. It's what gives salmon that pink color. It is the only antioxidant that is a true antioxidant. And that's what I do with those. So those are the electrolytes that I take. I genuinely believe them to be the best on the market. Now, coming back to that question, they are sweetened with stevia. Oh, excuse me. I am working on a stevia-free product. We're going to try to sweeten it with glycine instead. Now, I believed, even though stevia comes from a plant, up until recently, I've always believed stevia to be beneficial from the research that I found, but I've since come across research to suggest that it probably isn't the best. I don't think any sweetener, to be honest, that comes from a plant is going to be beneficial. Now, that said, I think it's one that's going to carry the least toxicity, but I am changing it. So for now, I'm happy because there's such a little amount in it. I'm happy to consume it, but we are working on a stevia-free electrolyte, which I'm hoping is going to be sweetened with glycine. If not, we will bring out a completely unsweetened version. The only difficulty with this is salts are very difficult to consume, when they're in their salt form. you and I would happily consume this, and I'm sure many of your followers would too, in pursuit of optimal health. But again, to gravitate that person in from this coming through the door stage and those incremental changes, it almost seems like such a big step. But that's what I'm doing with lots of the products. We are removing any of, you know, the so-called, they are technically natural sweeteners, but I believe that it's a product that is incredibly good, but could be better. And this is the constant evolution of the product and the process. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do.
Love it. Okay. Do you do refeeds?
Carb
Or are
refeeds?
you constantly in maintenance calories? So there's no need for a refeed since you're never in a caloric deficit, you know?
Now, I don't go by calories. And I know this is the, you know, the agreed unit of measurement, but not all calories are created equal. And the reason I say this is that calories from different sources work differently within the body. So to put that into perspective, if you had 100 calories and you had a piece of steak that contains 100 calories, the lectins within that muesli is going to cause 5 times more fat storage than that piece of steak. So to put this into perspective, I can consume 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, live in a ketogenic carnivore lifestyle, and maintain a stable body weight of a body fat percentage of around 9 to 10%. Now, when I was consuming carbohydrate at 2,700, I would gain fat on a regular basis. So it's not the calories, it's the effect on insulin. And then there's the thermic effect of food. To a point, the more protein we consume, so protein carries a high thermic effect, which means it costs the body 25 to 35% of its calories to digest, absorb, and process. So if we were to look at a standard diet, which is high in carbohydrate, and we were to swap that 70% of carbohydrate to a protein source and swap the protein to carbohydrate, the body, that thermic effect would increase the body's ability to burn around 370 extra calories per day, I think. I do have it written down somewhere. It is in the presentations I give. It's either 270 or 370, but it's a considerable amount. So that's the thermic effect of food. So if you were consuming more meat, you were burning more energy. And I say energy over calories because I don't like the term calories per se. And then if you were consuming low carb, so people think that, again, it's all about the calories, but when you were consuming low carb, this increases metabolic rate to the sum of 278 calories per day. So there was a study that looked at, they split people into 3 groups: low carb, moderate carb, and high carb. The study was isocaloric, which means everyone was on the same calories. And what they found is the low carb group compared to the high carb group increased metabolic rate to the sum of around 278 calories per day. Now, if you were to believe that 3,500 calories would result in a pound of weight stored, gained, or lost, which is incorrect, that's completely inaccurate, but let's play the whole caloric model in its own game. If we were to believe that, then that additional increase in metabolic rate would allow us to burn an additional 2 stone per year, 28 pounds. So either way, whether we believe, you know, in that 3,500 calorie hypothesis or not, we can maintain a weight from consuming a lot more. So now coming back to the refeed question, I do fat feeds. Now I will alter, so I eat foods in complex. I tend not to add fat to my food anymore. Now in the beginning, I would cook in butter. I would add double cream to my coffee. Now I've moved away from double cream. It doesn't serve me very well. Again, I think it causes intestinal permeability. But beyond that, I just don't think it's optimal for health. And coffee, I don't believe that's optimal for health either. So, you know, coffee's high in a compound called acrylamide, which leads to cancer, inflammation, and loads. That's a whole other topic. But so I've tried to massively remove the volume of coffee that I consume. And the reason I say reduce rather than remove completely, I do still consume coffee every so often. I haven't been able to eradicate it completely. And this is because I believe acrylamide is accumulative. So by that, I mean, if you were to consume coffee 3 to 4 times a day, this acrylamide is building up. But I think if you were consuming 1 coffee a week, acrylamide is excreted from the body, and we can deal with that incredibly well. But that said, I don't think it's still a plant, and it still carries, these other mycotoxins and other things that ideally remove coffee from your diet as well. But if you can't remove it, heavily reduce. So I've removed cream, double cream, for that fact as well. But I eat foods in complex, and by that I mean an egg contains protein and fat, a piece of steak contains protein and fat, salmon contains protein and fat, a chicken breast with the skin on is protein and fat. Nature provides us with this perfectly packaged present that contains every micronutrient that we need, not just to survive, but thrive. I don't need to add fat to my diet. I just eat fattier cuts of meat. The only fat that I would add, I'm not against, if I was to go somewhere and they were to cook in butter, that's fine. If I eat out, cook my food in butter rather than seed oils. In fact, I tell the restaurant that I go to that I'm allergic to vegetable oils. Do not cook my food in vegetable oils. Either grill, dry fry, or cook in butter. So I'm not against butter or tallow, lard, ghee, any of these things. I just don't add them to cooking. The only thing that I would add occasionally is MCT. And I do that because I find that it massively increases my body's ability to function at a much higher level. I find that when my ketones are elevated, I am much more compos mentis. I perform a lot better physically and mentally. Now, I could achieve this through consuming excess fat. But what I find is when I do consume excess fat, I do gain weight a lot quicker, which is fine because I believe that to be healthy weight. But for running and cycling, it seems counterintuitive because I'm happy to fill the intramyocellular lipids, which is fat stored in muscle, but I don't want to store any excess body fat. I want to maintain a lean physique for running and cycling, and sub 10% is good. I want to gravitate closer to 6, but it's proven difficult. Now I can get there. I know that I can do that because when I compete around 2%. But that isn't good for, but that isn't healthy, and it's not good for running or cycling either. I believe that we need around 6% body fat, but I find that I can get that extra energy and elevation in ketones through exogenous ketones and through C8 oils and powders. But other than that, I don't do an awful lot of fat feeds. But when I was competing, I would fat feed every few days. So instead of a carb feed, I would fat feed. I would add extra fats to increase the intracellular myolipids. I don't do carb refeeds. I do not do carb refeeds anymore. I don't believe we need carbohydrate in our diet whatsoever. And the only argument would be, if you were competing at a professional level, then possibly. But again, I still believe that we do not need carbohydrate for that. The jury is still out. There's conflicting evidence and research in regards to elite level athletes, but we do not need carbohydrate for an average person, even competing at a high level. Carbohydrate are not required. But the jury is still out on pro athletes and whether they can maybe increase their athletic ability that ever so slightly, slight amount.
Especially in endurance, maybe we don't
possibly. But again, I think that coming back to this lactic acid system and the body's ability to upregulate the lactic acid cycle, I believe that we can create sufficient glucose anyway. And studies have shown this. There are studies out there that have shown this in ultra marathon runners. It's just putting that into practice in the real world. It does not work for me. If I put carbohydrate in, carbohydrate does not work well for me. The only carbohydrate that I can put in without any negative side effect is white rice. And the reason for that is white rice is lectin free. So if you are going to experiment with carbs, I would recommend experimenting with white rice over anything else. And only a little amount. We don't need an awful lot. I mean, a lot of people gravitate into honey. Honey does not work well for me. Fruit does not work well for me. But again, I'm only one person.
How would you know they don't work for you? What are the symptoms, or you just feel off in general?
Yeah, I get gastro distress. I get, when I eat honey, my tongue swells up and becomes all tingly.
Oh,
So, I mean, that should tell you everything you need to know.
right.
If you put something in your mouth and your mouth has a reaction, it's not meant to be there. Yeah, and that's obviously going to affect with breathing. But gastro distress is the main thing. I get an upset stomach. Not to the point where it causes major issues, but you know, red meat does not cause gastro distress, despite what people will think. You know, excess fats possibly initially when they're beginning on their journey, but this is your gut microbiome simply adapting to a new lifestyle. And it will adapt incredibly quickly. Your gut microbiome will adapt to the food that you are consuming, and it will adapt incredibly quickly. But fruit doesn't work well for me. Berries are, or at least when I used to eat berries, they would seem to be okay. But again, I wouldn't seem to have any benefit to consuming them.
Mm.
But it would have a downside in the respect of firing up the receptors for craving carbohydrate again. After consuming berries, I would feel like I would need to consume sugar. And I don't feel like that at all anymore. I get cravings, but my body craves fat. You know, when I get cravings, I was craving bacon, you know, and chicken skin, or a piece of steak and eggs, you know. So those are the
That's
cravings.
right. That was my question too. I wanted to ask you on that. And I want you to also share with me, give me an example of a fat refeed, because I am right now is also pretty much, maybe not as much as you are training, not for like a duathlon. I think I said that right. But I'm running half a marathon consistently, right? And sometimes I do it in so many days in a row where I get to a point where, do I need a recovery? You know, so I wanted to ask you, how do you know that you need a recovery? And also, what is that fat refeed meal? What does it look like? Maybe give me some ideas.
So you will feel fatigued. Now the beauty of a Garmin is that it will register your HRV, your heart rate variability. Now, this will give you an indication that you are fatigued and need time to recover. You can also tell by resting heart rate. So my resting heart rate will be around 5 to 6 beats higher than it is when I'm at 100%. Most of this recovery comes from electrolytes, I believe, salts. So if not supplement with electrolytes, salt in particular, we need lots of salt. We need, I believe, close to 10,000 milligrams of salt per day, which is, you know, probably 8 to 9 times what we are recommended. Now, salt, we are told, increases blood pressure, and that's a fallacy. Essential hypertension is an insulin-dependent state. It's caused through insulin resistance. Now, when we become carnivore low carb, insulin drops and it signals the kidneys to release sodium from the body. So we have a much harder job of holding on to sodium. So salt all your meals, pink Himalayan or a Celtic sea salt, any natural salt, fantastic. So salt, I believe, is first protocol. As far as the fat refeed goes, I would go for, I don't know if, I'm sure you have this in the US, I would buy a chuck steak. Now, chuck steak is incredibly fatty. If I can't get chuck steak, I will go for mincemeat with the highest fat percentage that I can. Now, I wouldn't fat feed using MCT because MCT does not store, it acts too quickly. It's fantastic for mental clarity. It's fantastic for insulin resistance. It's fantastic for, excuse me, public speaking events. It's fantastic for cognition. It's not good for fat feeding. It's ideal for taking before an event, but you don't want to be fat feeding the night before with MCT because it's not going to store. Omega-3s don't store well in the body, but these are very good as anti-inflammatory. So that's your EPA and DHA. So you can get these from mackerel, sardines, and salmon. So you're not going to store any of this omega-3, but that will help massively with inflammation. So if part of your recovery requires an anti-inflammatory, omega-3s are fantastic. But you need to be thinking of your saturated fats, your fats from your animal proteins. It could even be butter, tallow, lard, or ghee. But my first protocol is always red meat, and in the form of chuck steak, lamb maybe, and those types of foods, the heavier percentage of the mince meats. There's no, scientific measurement that I've got for this, but I've based it on research that I found. I mean, a carb athlete will store around 5% of fat in their muscle. I believe, being keto and carnivore, that we can massively increase this to at least double. So I believe that we can consume around at least 10% of fat in muscle. And the reason I've come to that conclusion is that when I was bodybuilding, I would fat feed. So other carb athletes would carb feed, and I would fat feed. So I would spend 2 days refeeding on high saturated fats, and I would store about 7 pounds of fat in my body, in the intracellular lipid, without causing any fat gain. So that fat was stored in the muscle. So that's how I came to that conclusion. Now, when I was competing, I did put carbohydrate in. And this was the only time that I would utilize carbohydrate, other than when I was testing and experimenting. So I would spend 2 days fat feeding with dietary fat and protein. And then I would go to lean protein, and that's around about 0.5 grams per pound of body weight. And I would consume carbohydrate from white rice, beginning small, but for 3 days. Day 3, I'd end up on 900 grams of carbohydrate from white rice. Now, this would allow me to store an additional 10 pound on my body in the form of glycogen. That 10 pound combined with that 7 from the fat feed would allow me to gain 17 pound in 5 days. So you've just shrunk your body down. So you're ripped and shredded, and your body fat is 2 to 3%. And
Wow.
Suddenly you fill the intracellular lipids and the glyco, and now my body looks vacuum packed. And this is how I used to win. So I used to utilize carbohydrate as a tool purely for aesthetic purposes, but I do not use it for health purposes. Now, since I've come away from bodybuilding, I have not consumed much carbohydrate. The last time I consumed carbohydrate was Christmas. And the only reason for this was my mother invited us over for Christmas dinner, and she did ask me what I would consume and what I wouldn't consume. But because she was going through the effort of cooking a Christmas lunch, I said, look, Mom, you cook whatever you want, and I'll just, for 1 day, I'll consume it. But I felt absolutely awful the next day. But my body dealt with it incredibly quickly, and that was the last time. Prior to that, it was probably last May where I'd utilize carbs, but I utilized it as a tool, and I did not utilize it as a health benefit. But for running, coming back to that, so omega-3s for inflammation, exogenous ketones are incredibly good for anti-inflammatory purposes. Exogenous ketones, they block a pathway called NLRP3 inflammasome, which the body does from being ketogenic and carnivore. But if you elevate this to a level of over 2 millimolar, it'll help with anti-inflammatory purposes to no end. Now, the downside, which isn't really a downside, it is a positive, but being ketogenic and carnivore for so long, is you've probably noticed this as well. When you begin your journey, your ketone levels are elevated to 2, maybe 3 millimolars. As you adapt, your ketone levels drop, and we think that we're doing something wrong. But it's not that we are doing something incorrectly. It's just a case that our body becomes more efficient and is utilizing those ketones instead of wasting them and having them circulating in the blood, which is fantastic. That means our brain is utilizing them, our body, our muscle, and that's great. But for anti-inflammatory purposes, if we can further elevate that with MCT or BHB, this will help aid with muscle recovery. Elite athletes who are not ketogenic or carnivore, who compete in the Tour de France, for example, will utilize exogenous ketones after training in order to help with inflammation and to increase EPO. EPO is the substance that Lance Armstrong was banned in the Tour de France for, because he was supplementing with this as a drug. But EPO, when you take BHB, is created naturally. It's increased naturally. So it is not illegal, and the tests can tell this, that it is naturally produced. But this will help with athletic performance as well. But increase your fats for sure, from saturated fats, omega-3s. And what I would do is the night before, I would consume that meal, that fatty meal, between 12 to 16 hours before your event. We don't need food in our belly to run. You know, we are ketogenic carnivore. This is our fuel, and we've got an unlimited source. Top up on your electrolytes, your salts, but do the run fasted, and just have that confidence in the knowledge that you know your body is superior. You are superiorly metabolically flexible. Your body has the capability to utilize an energy source that nobody else can use, and you do not need any energy through carbohydrate or any energy, consumed orally. Everything you've consumed that night prior has filled those intracellular myolipids, and you are ready to hit that road run. And you can comfortably run a marathon without having to consume any food the morning before an event. And you're going to be lighter on your feet. So if you were not consuming before running, you were going to be carrying less weight. If you were not consuming carbohydrate, you were going to be carrying less weight, because that carbohydrate, for every 1 gram of carbohydrate we consume, 3 to 4 grams is stored in water. So as an athlete running a marathon or half marathon, you could be carrying 5 to 7 pounds in additional weight purely through additional carbohydrate. Why would you do that to yourself? This probably weighs a kilogram or 2.2 pounds. Now, if I give you this bottle and said, go and run your half marathon carrying this, you would look at me and tell me to get lost. I'm not carrying that for half. But this is what we are doing when we are consuming carbohydrate. We are carrying this extra weight. And this is where the carbohydrate athlete, or another area in which the carbohydrate athlete has got it completely incorrect. But we don't do that. So we will put a little bit of weight on through adding in the fat. But this is quickly utilized in the form of ketones, but we are not storing any extra additional to that in the form of glycogen and water. And you will find you will wake up light on your feet in the morning, your stomach is lean and trim, and you're not feeling bloated, and you will have an incredible run. Electrolytes, salts, be sure to get lots of salts in.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other recovery methods other than the supplements and the fat feeding and the, high fat carnivore foods, like massages, saunas, baths? I don't know, anything.
Yeah. So, yeah, a hot tub is fantastic. I don't get the opportunity to indulge myself in a hot tub these days. I used to own a hot tub, but my wife and I sold our house to put into the business, to which the hot tub went with. So we no longer have a hot tub, but cold water therapy is fantastic. I don't do that enough. A cheap way to do this is a cold shower. It is difficult, but you can jump in a cold shower. That's fantastic. Red light therapy is brilliant, but I have to travel a long way to do that, so I tend not to do that too often. But just being in water is fantastic for healing. And massage, I use a local lady who does acupuncture and deep tissue massage. I've gone there regularly for massage. I find that does help incredibly with recovery. It destroys you for a day or two, but it definitely speeds up the recovery process. And I've gravitated into experimenting with acupuncture lately because I've been having little niggles because I've been running and cycling, and I've been suffering with pains that I've never suffered from before. I've tried everything else and nothing else had worked. And it's purely because I've done too much too soon. So too keen. I've gone from doing no running or cycling to doing lots of running, lots of cycling, long distance, and quite quickly. So I experimented with acupuncture. I know a lot of people out there, might think that it's a load of rubbish, but it did seem to benefit me. They tap into things called the meridians in the body, which release pressure. And it did seem to benefit and aid me with recovery. So I'll do that occasionally as well. And that's it, basically. I mean, most of my protocol is diet related, and it comes back down to that steak. The steak is the most nutrient dense food on the planet, isn't it?
And do you schedule a day off, or like how many days do you go in a row of intense training? How many hours? And when do you know if you need 1 day off or 2 days off, or do you not take any days off?
So when I was bodybuilding, I had very little time off. I believed at the time that that was the best way to move forward. The last year of competing, I realized through extensive research that probably wasn't the best protocol. The body needs to repair. And I changed my style of training. So I went from doing heavier lifts into concentrating on eccentric movements. So this is concentrating on lifting the weight down slowly, holding, and then exploding rather than exploding. And so eccentric over concentric. So I increased my rep ranges using a lighter weight, but time under tension then, if you like. So keeping that time, those rep ranges a lot slower. That made me a lot bigger, and it made me stronger when it did come to lifting the heavy weights. It did improve strength as well. At least I was stronger. So whether it contributed to that or not, I can only say that I went to lifting heavy weights and I was lifting heavier weights. Time off is important, but what I used to do was active recovery. So instead of having a day off completely, I would go in and lift maybe just the bar, with no weights on, and just to keep the body moving.
Yeah.
Although I think a day off, to be honest, I think a day off is probably more beneficial. But if you are going to do something active recovery, just do a light jog or walk or lift light weights, Now that I'm running and cycling, it's a lot more difficult because running involves your legs and cycling involves your legs. So I'm finding it very difficult to, the idea was to either run or cycle every day and alternate these days between high intensity and zone 2 training, which is just basically spinning your legs. That I haven't been able to implement that because it's taken me a lot longer to recover, because I'm using the neuromuscular part of my legs, which I've never used before. And I've never hit these. You're not going to hit this range unless you were running and cycling. And I noticed quite early on that it was taking a lot longer to recover from running and cycling than it was from weight training. But I had trained for years and years and years, so my body built up, the ability to adapt to that. But with running and cycling now, I'll play it by ear. So, for example, I did an easy cycle yesterday, what I'd call a zone 2 cycle. So today, I think I'm going to go for a fast run. So I'm going to do either like a tempo or a fast run. And then tomorrow, I'll probably do some form of zone 2 training again, and then hopefully do something with a higher tempo on the bike. So I try to do the 80-20 rule. So most of my training is spent in zone 2, so building on the base, and then 20% of my training is higher intensity, where you're going, you're giving a lot more and working, the zone 5. But it doesn't always fall on the day that you want it to. You may still be injured. So I've been listening to my body, and the reason that I'm doing this is because early on I was not listening to my body, and I would, I'm going to get out there and just train hard regardless, because my body will adapt. But it didn't. It just caused injury. So
that's me. That's me. I'm gonna make it adapt, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm drained, And that's why actually today is one of those days, which is why I'm asking you so much about those recovery tools. It's like, what should I add to my toolkit for recovery?
You need recovery days. You need a day off. You need a rest day, and you need a day off mentally as well, because on the days that you are not training, if you are anything like me, you'll probably find that you throw yourself deeper into work, and then your brain is working overtime, and your body is not actually resting. I mean, sometimes you just need to go for a walk and not think about anything, or do something that involves. Yeah.
So the mental that you just mentioned, that I don't think I've ever heard anybody mention that. I've talked to coaches before, and they will say, like, if you're gonna have a recovery day, have a recovery day. Don't be walking, hiking. It's like, oh, I'm moving, but it's a recovery day. It's like, no, like, sit on a couch and don't move a muscle. So I've heard people say that, and I've always thought about it, but I've never heard of anybody say, even your brain, like, let it shut down. That's hard.
It is. Well, your brain uses more energy than anything else in your body. And I become exhausted. So I went to a conference the weekend just gone. I spent the entire time sitting down. So this is a perfect example. I didn't have time to train. I came back on the Monday and with every intention of having a very good training session. I could not train because I was absolutely exhausted. Now, I'd done nothing all weekend other than network and speak to people and sit there and listen to people. So my brain had worked to such a degree that my body was exhausted. So I couldn't train Monday. I had to take a day off. So listen to your body. I think we need that. Recovery is incredibly important. What you borrow today, you've got to pay back tomorrow. So you may as well just take a day off, read a book, read a book that doesn't involve, so not research, read a book that you can just get lost in, chuck something on Netflix that you can just zone out to, sit outside, get some vitamin D, go for a walk down the beach. I know you said not too much, with the walking, but I think walking is perfectly fine, as long as you're not hiking for 10 miles.
Right.
Being out in nature, is incredibly important. These are things that are incredibly important for recovery, but we need to listen to our body. It's and we don't do enough of that, and I know it's difficult working for myself. I get messages and emails and inquiries all hours of the day, and so I try to make a conscious effort not to look at my phone.
Yeah.
Because the second you look at your phone, there's a message. You reply to that message, and then there's another 10 messages. You reply to those messages. Every one of those people come back to you, and then before you know it, you're an hour deep into messaging, and your brain is working overtime, and you have not sat and rested and implemented any recovery,
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. I have learned so many new things today, and I'm sure that my audience is just learning a gazillion things, because every single topic you seem to have an insane amount of knowledge about. So I can feel like we have a round 2 in the works. We absolutely need to talk more. Yes.
Speaking of which, I believe you've been in contact with a friend of mine in regards to the 24-hour carnivore live that we are doing in July. Has he spoken to you about this?
Charles Maddox?
No, Stephen Thomas.
Oh, no, not yet. I haven't received that one yet. I received something else that we're also doing similar to what you're talking about, but yeah.
Right. Okay. So Stephen said, unless it's come from that other person, but Stephen and I are running a 24-hour carnivore live. So we're going live on July the 9th, 8 a.m. UK time. We are running on YouTube for 24 hours straight. And we're going to be talking all things keto carnivore, predominantly carnivore. And we have invited guests on. So Dr. Anthony Chafee is coming on board. Ben Azadi, if he can make it, is coming on board. I believe Bart Kay is making an appearance. So we've got a lot of people from different parts of the ketogenic carnivore community who are coming on board. I met with Dr. Benjamin Bickman the weekend. He was at this conference. He hasn't confirmed by message, but he did say verbally that he would make an appearance if he could. So, we're unsure of that one, but if he can come on board.
Now that you mention all of this, I may have received an email and I may have said, yes, count me in. And then I forgot about it. That might have happened. It's just lately, how your business sometimes goes through like exponential growth. Like I'm in that phase where I can barely keep up with the load of emails that I get, and I hired now somebody to help me with a lot of the content creation, but I feel like I really need a VA now, like a virtual assistant to help me with the administrative stuff. So now that you mention it, I'm pretty sure I said yes. And yeah, of course, I would love to be there.
Fantastic. And then what you just said reiterates the fact or the point that we just made about resting the brain. So, I mean, it just shows that, the brain is fatigued. It's something that you've forgotten about because of the pure volume of work and lack of rest that you were doing. So I think, a virtual assistant and something to help with emails, for sure, that's going to help. But fantastic. If you can come on board with that, it's July the 9th. It's going to be 24 hours of world leading experts, including yourself, part in words of wisdom.
Absolutely. I would
I
love
think,
to. Yeah.
excellent. I think it's going to be fun. Yeah, the list is growing, and I think we're going to be inundated with people who want to be a part of it. So yeah, if your viewers would like to come on board with that, and and watch you part your words of wisdom, fantastic. We'll see you guys there.
Yay. And where else can people find you and work with you?
Fantastic. So I'm on Instagram as keto_pro. Now I'm carnivore. My personal profile is carnivore_athlete_UK. I think that's right, unless it's the UK the other way around. I can't quite remember. I'll send it to you.
Don't worry. I know I checked them all out today, and I'll
Perfect.
post them in the description box below, and they're going to be on top of our screens every once in a while. They'll pop up.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Fantastic. So that's where I am. Now, don't let the keto handle throw you off if you are pure carnivore, because I'm carnivore. I live a carnivore lifestyle. This is what I'm trying to do with my community, is gravitate them into a more animal-based lifestyle. But as I said, it's all part of this softly approach. So don't be thrown off if you see me posting something that isn't carnivore in regards to a product or something that is just low carb, because I'm trying to build that community and gravitate them into our community. But yeah, feel free to follow me on there. Lots of super important advice that we put out. As you saw in the podcast with Anthony Chafee, there was a lot of information that I think very few people probably understand and know about. I'm also on YouTube. We've got a YouTube channel, Keto Pro. I'll send you the link to that as well. And we're available on the website, which is theketopro.com. We are basically a website that stocks all sorts of low-carb, ketogenic, keto-friendly, and carnivore foods and supplements. So there's a wide range of foods on there. All of the podcasts and YouTube channels and content is available on there in the knowledge base. And I have a Facebook group called Keto. Again, it's an eclectic group of low-carb, ketogenic, and carnivore. So there's all sorts going on in there. But if you want to be a part of that and come in and share words of wisdom, or just be part of a community and help, I mean, and that's the thing. This community is predominated by the low-carb people, but what we need is more carnivore in order to educate the low-carbers and say, it's fantastic what you're doing. Eating these foods and gravitating slowly is fantastic. Why don't you try implementing this, or why don't you try removing this? We need more educators in there from the the keto and carnivore community. So if that's something you want to be part of, feel free to join and chat with me there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Richard, for giving us this time and this knowledge and wisdom. It's inspiring. Your transformation is just mind-blowing, and just goes to show you what the proper species-specific diet can do for us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you all for staying with us till the end. If you enjoyed this kind of content, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.